All right, so why don't we get started? So today's webinar is all about metrics. This is the second in our series. There's going to be about 4 or 5 of these series in total, each one sort of building upon the other. And today's topic is metrics, what they are, what you can do with them, how they're constructed. So there's a lot of learning to be done. And the two presenters are myself and Graham Watts, our senior software architect. So let's get into sort of describing what we're going to focus on today and what we're going to learn. So ultimately, we want to sort of make sure that this is as valuable as possible for you over the next half hour. So we're going to walk through what a metric is, what metric-based BI is, and what problems it solves. We'll learn about different types of metrics. We'll understand the components. That's an important part of it, the components of metrics, and learn how you can apply metrics. And then also at the end, walk you through sort of a framework on how to get set up and started with a metric-based approach. All right, so why don't we start though with a bit of a story. So we're gonna take this story of a business starting, and the business that we're looking at is this sports-oriented pet company. Straight out of high school, two friends have this great idea, and they start a business offering sports equipment to pets. They start their business, they're full of excitement, and of course, like every new business, they start tracking some of their data and some of their metrics in Excel. It's very cut and paste. They're bringing things in from different systems like Google Analytics, Google Ads, and again, it's a lot of manual cut and paste type of effort. Eventually, as the system or as the company grows, they may hire a CMO, and as it happens, this CMO has some data history from her previous job. And she says we need to grow up from Excel, and we need to put some dashboard and reports in place, something that has a little bit more structure to it. So she takes that role on. Maybe some of the dashboards and reports are actually built based on that Excel data. And maybe some of it is actually coming from some source systems that the company is now using, like their CRM, like their advertising systems, et cetera. Now, this company is really successful and it keeps growing. And eventually they hire their first data professional. And they have this small and exciting new data team. And as the data team wants to put their mark on things, they start thinking a little bit more about metrics, defined, composable artifact that they will then use to distribute the data, the trusted data among the rest of the organization. And all of a sudden, with that comes this idea that self-serve and the data team can't be a blocking factor in this growth. They start making data and metrics, especially these safe, governed, defined metrics available to everybody in the company as self-serve BI artifacts. And that's really the journey that we want to see almost everybody go through. I think, the first part is inevitable. You're always going to start with some sort of spreadsheet, but we want to make sure that people get to this point where there's good definitions, safe definitions. Metrics are these first-class citizens that can help everybody in the organization make better decisions. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Graham to walk through the rest of the presentation, and then I'll join you at the end for a bit of a summary. So over to you, Graham.
Okay, thank you, Alan. So as companies grow and the data responsibilities within the companies tends to divide into two camps. There's the data experts of the data team that are responsible for sourcing the data, architecting the data, and controlling who has access. And then there's the decision makers in the company that need to make good business decisions based on that data. Those decision makers are usually making those decisions based on BI artifacts like dashboards and reports that are served by models by the data team. This is sort of the traditional BI model. Now, in order to create good dashboards and reports, you have to have a bit of an understanding of the data that's in the models. So often the data experts in the company, the data team, get roped into creating the dashboards and reports and editing the dashboards and reports. This creates a bit of frustration for the data team as they can't focus on their core responsibilities. It also creates frustration for the decision makers as they always have to wait for the next report to get the answer that they need to do their job. So metric-centric analytics proposes a new data artifact that fits directly between the responsibilities of the data team and the business users. So the data team can manage and create these artifacts, and the business users can self-serve off of these artifacts. So what is a metric? Well, before we get into a metric, I wanted to talk about a few terms, business metric-like business terms that you might be hearing about. A KPI is a key performance indicator, and that's something the business is measuring using data in order to determine the health of the business or how successful the business is. In traditional BI, you'd be using a report with the KPIs in the report to monitor that health of the business. OKRs are objectives and key results, and they are the goals that you're setting within a particular time period in the business based on those KPIs. So if you have a KPI that is your revenue, your OKR might be increasing the revenue by a certain percentage by the end of the quarter. And then we have metrics. Metrics are an actual data artifact that can be queried and in the system. So what makes a metric different from a traditional BI data model? Well, a metric is a data model, but it has a single, well-described business definition, and that is in business language so that the consumer knows exactly what it does, and it measures one thing and it means one thing. You can have many, many, many metrics in your system, but each one is singular in its meaning. Metrics only expose query operations that can't alter the meaning of the metric. So, so you wouldn't expose something like an aggregation choice because the same data aggregated differently has a different meaning. Total sales is different from average sales. But it does expose query operations that allow you to see that same metric in different contexts, like looking at the data for this month or last month, or if you have a country dimension, looking for the revenue in different countries, for example. Metrics also don't enforce any presentation logic or usage. In traditional BI, it's the report or the dashboard that ties meaning to the data and exposes that through presentation logic. A metric ties the meaning to the data directly, but it doesn't control how you use it. You can use it in any reports or dashboards. And metrics can be combined together to create new metrics and a richer set of metrics as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that's done later. So what are the components of a metric? Well, there's sort of three facets to the data within a metric. There are the values that are being measured, and each value within the metric has an associated timestamp with it that determines when when it was recorded or when that value relates to. Those two things together form the meaning of the metric. Most metrics also have dimensions, and they can have any number of dimensions that add extra context, which you can break the data down. And within the metric, not exposed to the end users, are some query rules and so on that are configurable by the person who creates the metric or edits the metric. And they tell the system how that they can actually query and prepare the data when the metric gets queried, but they're built into the metric. Just to see how a metric might map to a common BI visualization, in this case, you can see that the values within the metric form the data points in the visualization. The data can be broken down by time because there's that primary time axis, and you can see the historical values of the metric. And it can also be segmented. The various colors in the areas are different members within a dimension. They could be different countries in the country dimension, for example. The dimensions could have also been used to have filtered this visualization as well. So let's talk a little bit about some of the technologies which enable metrics to be created. The first technology, which examples have appeared on the market about half a decade or so ago, are metric platforms. And these are typically SaaS offerings that are a complete data stack in the box, optimized for metric storage and metric querying. They contain the metric definitions and the metadata descriptions of the metric, all within the system. They allow you to build up historical data within the metrics. So over time, the metrics will grow within the metric data storage, and you have more and more history of data to look at. And these are great for service APIs like Google Analytics and QuickBooks or hundreds of other APIs, where it's easy to query the current data or a short time window of data. And using a system like this on a regular refresh, you can bring the data in on a regular cadence and build that history up over time. It's also great for when the data is in spreadsheets or CSVs or other files. And if your business is moving from a case where all your data is in spreadsheets, You can apply a system like this to get going with metrics, and as your existing processes update your spreadsheets, you can keep re-importing them into the system to update the data in your metrics. More recently, we started to see a number of metric systems that expose SQL metrics or direct to data warehouse metrics. And in this case, the data stays in the data warehouse. You might need to do a bit of modeling within the warehouse or database to prepare some tables or views to connect the metric to. But once you've done that, it's just a matter of pointing the metric to the table and the fields within the table and setting a few query options within the metric to define how it can translate its queries into SQL queries against the tables in the database. We've also seen the rise of semantic layers quite recently, and semantic layers allow for very rich modeling within a data warehouse and some of the very advanced use cases. But they also add a layer of rich metadata, which a metric system can use to inform its own query options. So connecting a metric to a semantic layer is usually as simple as pointing to the fields in the semantic layer, and from those semantics, the metric system can determine how it needs to query them, and so on. Some semantic layers even have their own metrics layer built in. It doesn't matter which of these systems you use, and you can even use a mix of the systems together. The metrics you create from any of these will work the same way and behave the same way. Um, so what can you do with metrics? As we mentioned earlier in the presentation, you can combine metrics into new metrics. And this is done by creating what we call a calculated metric with a formula, where the operands in the formula are other metrics. And they can be any kinds of metrics. You can mix and match metrics from different systems using the formulas. And the way that the system works is it will query the underlying operands using the same query you've just queried the combined metric. It will join the results using a post-aggregation join, and it will then apply the formula to each row in the results, which creates a metric that behaves exactly like any other metric, follows all of the same rules, is queried the same way, and can even be used to create yet more combined metrics and to build up your library over time. With metrics, you can also combine metrics within visualizations, creating the rich visualizations that you typically see in BI applications. Even though metrics are singular in their meaning, visualizations don't have to be. And they can be done in a similar way by joining on the common context within the visualization. Here we have a very simple example of two metrics in their own visualizations. And because there is a shared time context, the data can be joined and lined up on that time context. But you can create far richer and more complex visualizations by putting the metrics together in the visualization layer, much like putting Lego blocks, which makes it very easy for end users to self-serve their dashboards and reports and their presentation needs from the metrics. There are other things you can do with metrics as well. One of the advantages of metrics is it allows you to create that single source of truth for the business, what we call your metrics catalog. So everybody knows where to find the metrics that the business uses. They can be certified, they can be described, and you can also get an overall sense of your business from the catalog. Data visualization, dashboards and reports are very easy for people to create using metrics because you can trust that you cannot change the meaning of the metric. It makes it easy for somebody who doesn't understand the underlying data architecture to make use of these within data visualizations and reports. Some advanced analyses become quite easy to apply to metrics because of the known structure of a metric. For example, time series analysis, which relies on a time axis being available with certain granularities. Since all of that is built into the metric system, a time series analysis can be applied to any metric out of the box. And metrics can also be queried like any other data. Metric systems typically have their own query language, but they also quite often provide a subset of SQL that you can use a JDBC driver to access a metric system just like any database, which makes it easy to bring it into other systems. I'd like to pass it back to Allan now to talk about how you might get going with metrics within your metric journey.
Okay, thanks, Graham. It's amazing. I mean, it's the consistency and the safety that is sort of the result of defining, locking down, and trusting what a metric is, that I think is massively powerful. And that was the common theme, I think, throughout all of your examples. So why don't we talk about how we start applying that and how end users or decision makers actually start benefiting from this metric first approach. So let's, and there's three slides that I want to walk you through. So let's start with understanding, doing a bit of a needs analysis. So this always starts, I mean, as with any project, this starts with a discussion between, in this case, the data team and the end users or the decision makers. So identify what's important to the business, what goals is the business moving towards, identify what kind of data you currently have, and then, of course, identify any kind of gaps that the business wants that maybe the data doesn't support right now. So then we want to obviously understand, well, how can this data support the KPIs that we're looking for? We want to understand what are the OKRs and how can they be measured relative to the data? So those goals that are important to an OKR system. So we want to understand that. And then finally, we want to take that list and all the understanding that we have worked on with the decision makers or between the data team and the end users. And we want to prioritize what KPIs and then, of course, what OKRs are required by the business. So that gives us that roadmap that we want to move towards. Okay, so let's take that needs analysis and apply it to actually building out and organizing your metric catalog. So once the data has been understood and what the gaps are and what you have and how you want to structure it, so you're going to define the data architecture so that it can support the metrics and the goals that you want to move forward with. So once we have that, and it really starts, so understanding that data architecture, it really starts making a huge difference. If you have that part right, building out your metrics and supporting those KPIs, building in the goals, everything starts getting a lot easier. So make sure that the data foundation has been done properly. You understand what the long term looks like and you move that forward. So as I mentioned, so you're building out your metrics, you're defining your goals and you're supporting those OKRs. And again, this is optional. Defining the goals could come later once you've actually got the metric catalog in place. So you build these things, often it's iterative. Once you define various different metrics, you want to make sure that the decision makers understand what the definition is. And by the way, as a little sidebar, it's really important when you're defining the metric that definition, that not only the name of the metric, but also the definition of that metric is front and center. And even the calculation, even how the metric has been calculated, if it's a calculated metric, or where the data comes from, that the end user understands all of that stuff so that they can trust that they're looking at the right data, they fully understand it. So once we've done that, once we've defined our metrics, we've built them, we optionally have done goals, we start looking at, okay, the governance of who has access to these metrics and how are we going to distribute those throughout the organization. In doing that, obviously, as you're starting to share them for the end user, they're going to see this metric catalog start populating. So every day that they come in, they may have a few more metrics, and some of them may be base metrics, some of them may be calculated or derived metrics, but they're going to see this catalog of trusted, amazing metrics showing up that they can use. And then obviously, as with any rollout of any sort, you may want to think about some training. That you provide to these users. And that's a good feedback loop as well. And that actually brings us to the last slide. So making sure that there is this feedback loop or process for improvement. So again, and there's two major things here. We want to make sure that the users have a way to request or describe what's missing or what they need. And you'll easily find that as you start rolling this out, there's more and more questions that end users want to understand and are going to be asking about. So definitely having that feedback loop is really important. And then, of course, the other thing, you want to make sure that if there's any issues or data integrity problems, that those get surfaced right away. There's nothing like data integrity issue that erodes the trust. So you want to make sure that you jump on those right away and have a way for that feedback to get back to the data team. And then, of course, as the catalog grows and as the number of metrics grow, as the number of dashboards or other artifacts grow, make sure that you're always maintaining the catalog. And you can do that a couple of ways. You can, on the positive side, you can make sure that you're certifying certain metrics. So certification in our platform is a very simple little way of putting a stamp of approval, a stamp of additional trust on metrics that have been validated. They're certified. It sort of gives this layer of extra safety to the end users, knowing that these are official metrics. Then, of course, make sure that you're cleaning out or hiding or unsharing unused metrics. There's nothing worse than somebody doing a search in the library and they find, 5 or 6 metrics that have a very, very similar name. None of them are certified and they don't know which one to use. So make sure that there's always a clear and understood path for your end users to find the right metric inside of your library. So make sure that old ones are cleaned out or deleted. And then just as I said, make sure that these redundancies are kept at bay. All right, so that sort of concludes it. Metrics is something that we've been thinking about for a very, very long time. We do fundamentally believe that it is the ideal consumption artifact, especially for self-serve BI. We continue to think that that is the holy grail of BI and something that has been missing over the past, actually probably 20, 30 years. This idea that end users can safely and in a familiar way use these trusted artifacts. So as Graham was saying, make sure that we're describing the metrics, we're enforcing their meaning, the aggregation type, etc. And then make sure that, the data teams are the stewards of good, trusted data, lineage, definitions, and that then translates, that's the bridge, that contract that moves over to make sure that end users have access to the right data, the trusted data, and that they feel comfortable and safe using this for better decisions. All right, we're going to wrap it up with that. And we're going to see if any questions came in. I do have 2 previous questions as well, actually, Graham, that I do want to ask you.
Okay, good.
And Meg, if there's any other questions that came in, we're certainly happy to take those as well. But Graham, here's 2 that I wanted to throw your way. So first question was, what are some key considerations when planning to scale a metric library or a metric catalog? Where will I need to pay special attention to avoid pitfalls, again, with scaling a metric catalog?
Well, that's a great question. One of the things that you have to be very careful of, and as you mentioned, is avoiding duplication, making sure that things are well named, that the metrics that you are core to the business are certified, so that they're easy for people to find. We find as the catalog grows, there ends up being more noise. So it does require a little bit of care from the data team on an ongoing basis to make sure that you've removed the duplication and that things all line up. One thing in particular that is a challenge is making sure that as you have more and more metrics, that your dimensions are named in consistent ways. And that's what would allow a system to connect those metrics together in the visualizations and calculated metrics along that context. So some care needs to be put into making sure that you have consistent naming, not just in the dimension names, but also in the member names and the data within the dimensions. That's
Yeah, that's a good point, Graham. It's consistency and clarity in the measures, the metric names, the definitions.
mhm.
But then yes, you're right. Not only the dimension names like country, but also the actual members inside of that in that list. So, sometimes you may have USA, you may have United States, you may have United States of America. So making sure that those members are consistent and you're maintaining those over time. So absolutely. I do have a second question here as well. So with AI tools released to market every day, is there still a need for modeled data or even metrics? Is this going to go away? So with AI and all the advances there, is the need for model data or metrics going to go away?
Well, I think that's been a question on a lot of people's minds. I think the short answer is no. I mean, a lot of the challenges that an AI system has with data are the same challenges that consumers have with data. And comes around the clarity and the ambiguity that is in the data. If data is ambiguous, whether a user is looking at it or whether an AI system is looking at it, they can come up with ambiguous results. So having a really good, clear data layer and data consumption layer and platform is just as important for AI's users, and I think it'll only become more important as AI systems become more prevalent.
Yeah, absolutely. That strong foundation.
Mm,
You're right. It doesn't matter if it's AI or if it's a user.
mhm,
Um, strong foundation, defined, opinionated metrics.
mhm,
A clean catalog is absolutely critical, no matter who's using that output for decisions. So,
mhm.
okay, that's great. Megan, were there any other questions that came in today?
No, just
Okay.
what you've had.
Okay, super. Well, look at this has been great. I think there's a lot of interesting details here and some guidelines for building out your own journey. We're always happy to help and chat more about how you can start your journey being metric-centric, define metrics, and build out a catalog of your own. So if you have any questions, as always, we are more than happy to help. Thanks, everybody.